In November 2013, Mark Zuckerberg flew to Los Angeles and offered Evan Spiegel $3 billion in cash for Snapchat. Spiegel was 23 years old. Snapchat had no revenue. It had no business model. It had never turned a profit. What it had was 30 million users, a genuinely novel product, and a founder who believed his company was worth more than $3 billion. Spiegel said no. The technology press called it the most arrogant decision in Silicon Valley history. What it actually was, what the decade that followed would reveal in careful and sometimes brutal detail, was the opening act of one of the most complicated stories in consumer technology. A story about a founder who was right about the product and wrong about almost everything else. A story about a company that invented a visual language used by hundreds of millions of people, and then watched a larger competitor absorb that language, replicate it feature by feature, and deploy it across a platform 10 times the size. A story about the specific difficulty of building a durable business on top of a brilliant idea when the people running the business confuse the brilliance of the idea with the sustainability of the advantage it creates. Evan Spiegel did not arrive at Snapchat through the conventional path of the technical founder solving a problem they personally experienced. He arrived through a product design class at Stanford, through a collaboration with Bobby Murphy and Reggie Brown, and through a legal dispute over who deserved credit for the original concept, eventually settled out of court, with Brown reportedly receiving around $157 million. The legal dispute established early what would become a recurring theme: that Snapchat's internal relationships were complicated, that its founder operated in ways that generated friction, and that the institution reflected its founder's personality in ways that were sometimes generative and sometimes costly. The original Snapchat concept was simple and genuinely new. Every photograph taken on a smartphone in 2011 was, by default, permanent. Stored, backed up, shareable, potentially retrievable forever. Spiegel and Murphy built a messaging application in which images disappeared after a set number of seconds chosen by the sender. The disappearing message concept addressed something real about how young people wanted to communicate, casually, impermanently, without the social pressure of a permanent record. The product grew among teenagers with the speed that products grow when they solve a genuine social problem for a population that has been waiting for the solution without knowing it. By 2013, Snapchat's users were sending approximately 400 million images per day. The majority were under 25. The product had found its audience with almost no marketing and built genuine behavioral habits that were difficult to replicate, because the habit was not just about the feature, but about the social network that had formed around it. Facebook's response to the rejected acquisition offer was methodical and, in retrospect, entirely predictable. In August 2016, Instagram, acquired by Facebook for $1 billion in 2012, launched Instagram Stories, a feature that was, in its fundamental mechanics, an almost identical reproduction of Snapchat's core Stories functionality. The implementation was clean, well integrated into a platform with over 500 million active users, and immediately available to every Instagram user worldwide without requiring any behavior change. Within 2 months of launch, Instagram Stories had 50 million daily active users. Within a year, it had more daily active users than all of Snapchat. The feature that Snapchat had built its cultural identity around was now available to a user base 10 times larger, on a platform with significantly greater network density, with full backward compatibility with every existing relationship each user had already established. Snapchat's response was to argue, with genuine justification, that Instagram had stolen its product. Spiegel said so publicly. He was correct. What he could not argue was that being copied by a larger platform is a business problem with only limited remedies, none of which involve the copying party having any obligation to stop. The correct response to being copied by a platform 10 times your size is not to be right about having been copied. The correct response is to build the next thing fast enough that the larger platform is always chasing rather than replicating. Snapchat's subsequent history is largely a story of how difficult that is to do when your organizational culture, your product strategy, and your founder's instincts are all pulling in directions that don't consistently support the speed and clarity that competitive survival requires. Snapchat went public in March 2017, pricing its shares at $17 and opening above $24 on its first day. The IPO valued the company at approximately $24 billion. The prospectus contained a disclosure that stood out even in a technology sector accustomed to unusual governance arrangements. Snap's share structure gave Class C shares, held entirely by Spiegel and Murphy, 10 votes per share, while the Class A shares sold to public investors carried 0 votes. Not 1 vote per share. 0. Public investors in Snap were purchasing equity in a company in which they had no voting rights whatsoever. They were capital providers with no governance influence of any kind. The arrangement reflected a genuine philosophical position that a founder should execute a long-term vision without quarterly market pressure. It also reflected a level of confidence in his own judgment that the subsequent record would test thoroughly. The years between the IPO and the present have been characterized by a pattern that has repeated with enough consistency to constitute a structural dynamic rather than isolated events. The most dramatic single episode was the Snapchat application redesign that Spiegel announced in late 2017 and began rolling out in February 2018. The redesign was intended to make Snapchat more accessible to an older demographic and to solve a genuine usability problem. The app had accumulated features that made it genuinely confusing for new users. The implementation separated content from friends and professional publishers in ways that the existing user base experienced as disorienting and unwelcome. A petition to reverse the redesign collected over 1 million signatures within days. Kylie Jenner, with approximately 100 million Instagram followers, tweeted that she had stopped using Snapchat. The tweet contributed to a stock decline that erased approximately $1 billion in market value within hours. Snap's daily active user count declined for 2 consecutive quarters following the redesign. The first consecutive user declines in the company's public history. Spiegel defended the redesign on terms consistent with his general approach. He believed he was right. The market was wrong in its immediate reaction, and the long-term benefit would vindicate the short-term disruption. The benefit arrived only partially and more slowly than the company's financial position could comfortably absorb. The advertising business Snap built to monetize its user base has always operated under structural constraints visible since the IPO. Snap's users skew younger than almost any other major consumer platform. Young users are, as an advertising demographic, less commercially valuable than older users with higher disposable incomes and established purchasing patterns. Snap's users are also more concentrated in the United States, United Kingdom, and Western Europe than its total daily active user numbers suggest, because the platform has never successfully penetrated the large user bases that Instagram, TikTok, and WhatsApp have built across South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. This geographic concentration means that Snap's monetizable user base is significantly smaller than its total user count implies. The advertising revenue per user in its core markets is real and has grown over time, but the ceiling is lower than the total count would suggest to an investor, evaluating the stock at a consumer technology growth multiple. The arrival of TikTok in Western markets between 2018 and 2020 introduced a second major competitive threat that operated differently from Facebook's replication strategy, but with equally consequential effects. TikTok did not copy Snapchat's features. It introduced a fundamentally different format, short-form video organized by algorithmic recommendation rather than social graph, that appealed to the same demographic cohort Snapchat had built its core user base around. TikTok's growth among teenagers and young adults restructured the attention economy of the 16 to 24 demographic in ways that affected every platform competing for that audience. Snap's daily active user counts continued to grow throughout this period because the company retained genuine loyalty, and its unique messaging functionality was not directly replicated by TikTok. But the time those users spent on Snap relative to their total social media usage declined as TikTok absorbed an increasing share of their daily attention. Declining time per user even with stable user counts, is a serious problem for an advertising-dependent business because advertising revenue is ultimately a function of attention rather than registration. Snap's response to TikTok was Spotlight, a short-form video product launched in November 2020 that paid creators directly from a fund initially sized at $1 million per day. The creator incentive strategy generated content and engagement, but did not produce the viral growth dynamic that TikTok's algorithm-driven discovery had created organically. Spotlight exists within Snapchat but has not become a destination in the way TikTok functions as one. The company also developed augmented reality features, Snap Lenses, that became genuinely popular and commercially valuable, both as consumer entertainment and as advertising formats. AR represents perhaps the most distinctive technical capability Snap has developed that is not easily replicated by copying because it requires both engineering investment and the user behavior patterns that make lens creation and sharing socially rewarding. Spiegel's vision for Snap's future has increasingly centered on augmented reality as the defining technology platform of the next decade. The vision has genuine intellectual coherence. If wearable AR becomes a mainstream computing platform, the company with the deepest expertise in AR content creation, AR social sharing, and AR advertising formats will be positioned to capture meaningful value from that transition. The question that the market has been asking with increasing urgency since Snap's stock reached a peak valuation of approximately $130 billion in September 2021, a price that implied the AR vision was commercially imminent, and then declined to a fraction of that value over the following 2 years, is whether the vision will materialize on a timeline the company's financial structure can survive. The story of Snap is not a story of failure in the sense that Theranos failed or Nokia failed. Snap is a functioning company with genuine user engagement, genuine revenue, genuine technological capabilities, and a founder who has maintained his conviction through a decade of competitive pressure and market skepticism that would have dismantled most institutions. What it is, more precisely, is a story about the specific difficulty of sustaining a business advantage built on a social behavior rather than on a technical architecture that is genuinely difficult to replicate. Snapchat invented a way of communicating that a generation genuinely loved. That invention could be, and was, copied. The question of what you build after the thing you invented has been copied, and how you build it fast enough to stay ahead of a competitor with 10 times your resources is the question Snap has been trying to answer since August 2016. Spiegel was right about ephemeral communication. He was right about visual messaging. He was right about augmented reality. Being right about the product has been necessary but not sufficient for building the kind of durable business advantage that translates into sustained value creation at the scale his early decisions implied. The market has made its current judgment visible in the stock price. Whether that judgment reflects the permanent condition of Snap's competitive position, or the temporary impatience of public markets evaluating a long-duration technology bet, is a question that only time will answer. If you want to understand which companies today are operating under the same dynamic, genuine product innovation being replicated by larger platforms with the question of what comes next genuinely unresolved, that is exactly what I track in my newsletter. The link is in the description, and if you want to see what happens when another company discovers that inventing something and owning something are two entirely different problems, click the videos above.